Hello, Mike here. I thought I'd make a little video that will demystify a little bit of the front end HTML, CSS, JavaScript track that we're doing now, and just to show I think this would be good for people who really have never seen how a web page is built and would like to know, what are we talking about when we're talking about HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. This is just a quick demo that I wanted to put out just so for those of you that have been saying that you're maybe a little intimidated or confused about what we're talking about, and I thought I would just make a very simple little web application and show that you can just do it in your browser, and I would encourage you to kind of follow along or try to repeat this later for yourself, because it's really fun and it's easy to get going. So a site that I like to use is called Codepen, CODEPN.io, and if you go there, you'll be able to create these things, which they call them pens, which are really like just little samples. So let's make a new pen. If I pick this pen here, and I get a brand new pen. So this is kind of a blank slate of HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Your view might look like this to start, and it's putting the three different kind of text editors for you to type in your code, and then down here it'll show you what it looks like. I like to change the view to kind of look like this, so we have a little bit more room to see our code next to an HTML page. So let's start off with HTML. HTML is the main language that the web is created with, and it describes what that page looks like. So if you look at what I'm doing here, I'll try to increase my font size a little bit here. These are called tags, and when you type them in, they use angle brackets around the tag name. So every HTML document should be this is called surrounding it with a HTML tag, and then there's a body tag which is then used for the contents of what's visible on the page. There's stuff outside the body tag that you'll learn about later, but it's used for like referring to other kinds of files that your page might need. So inside the body tag, you can just type something. You can just type hello, and if I save that out, now here's a web page. This is a totally valid web page. If you got this far, you're done. Like you've created a web page, and you can then save this. Codepen will let you create a free account if you want to save your work, or you can just type here if you want to do it that way too. I'll go ahead and save that. So this is the simplest example of a web page, but let's do something that requires like a little bit of HTML, a little bit of CSS, and a little bit of JavaScript to show a somewhat more complicated example, but just to give you a feeling for all the different parts of all of these languages. So first of all, if we just write text there in the web page, it's just a default format text. But if we want to say like, well, maybe this is the title for my web page, there's another tag used called heading tags. They look like H1, H2, H3, things like that. So the example I had in mind was just to add two numbers together in a form. So we're going to create like a little program which adds two numbers and shows you the results. So we have to collect data input from the user in the form of two numbers that they're going to type in. Then we'll have a button that lets you add the two numbers together, and then we're going to display the result on the screen. So we're going to call this page Add Two Numbers. So you'll notice that the first rule of HTML tags is they're generally always supposed to be balanced. So you have an opening tag like this where you just have H1 in brackets, and then to tell it where the heading ends, you put a slash and then an H1 in between the brackets at the end. So that's the opening tag and the closing tag. So so that's how we'll start off our web page. And next we need a way to collect the numbers themselves. So there's another tag that's especially for this called the input tag. And usually you create a form with these input tags, like if you see a web form, that'll include that. And so you'd have a label and then an input. So let's go ahead and do that. Let's have a label, and we're going to say the first number, and we'll end the label there. And then we're going to have an input. And now we're going to do something new here. We're going to add an attribute to this tag. So the way this works, let's see if I have to. So the way this works is tags can have like additional properties or attributes that tells the browser like what this thing is used for. So here in this case, the input tag is specific to typing in a number. And if you look at the way this works, I get special little controls here. This is actually not a very commonly used tag on the web, but it exists in the spec, in the modern web spec. So you can use it to increment numbers. So if they start off with 1, you can increment it. And that's just the way it works right out of the browser, this input type text. And then let's add another one for a second number. There's a second number is our label, and another input type equals number. Oh, I get the attribute in quotes here, and there's a second one. Okay, so now all of a sudden you see like, well, I see like all that stuff is in the web page, but that doesn't look very good. We want them to kind of stack up, and so we're going to have to create like a little box around each one so that they'll stack up nicely. And the standard way to make a little box where things will fit in is called a div, D-I-V. So we are going to create a div. We're going to start the div in front of the first input, and then we're going to end the div at the end of the second one, and then we'll do the same thing for the second one. Open a div, and then close a div. So now let me see if I can show a little bit more of this code here. So now we have two divs. This is a div, and inside of it is a label and an input, and another div which also has a label and input. And notice now that they stack up as kind of like boxes. Great. Now we're going to want to create a button that says add them up. Let's make another div because then we're going to stack up our button too. There's a button tag, and we can just say add. There it is. There's our button, our add button. We'll close that. And then we need a place to show the answer. So let's create another div, and let's add another label that says answer. I'll put a colon there, and now our answer has to go into an element somewhere. All of these things are called elements. So some of these are label elements, div elements, input elements. If you want to put just some text somewhere in a web page, you can use what's called a span element. So span, and we'll create it here. So we could put a dummy answer in here. Let's see. I'm gonna write the word undefined in here. There we go. Answer is undefined. Okay. And then I think I have to close the div All right. So that's our web page, and we have a place. Now it doesn't do anything because we haven't hooked up any JavaScript to do anything yet. But you can click the button, you can type into the text forms and things like that. So the next thing we want to do is make this look a little bit better. So that's what CSS is all about. CSS, it stands for Cascading Style Sheet. And speaking of that, HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language. So HTML is a language that describes how a web page looks. It's not a programming language because it doesn't really have data structures and things like that per se, but it's a language. Anyways, CSS is another language, and it has its own rules and ways of writing it. And the whole point of CSS is to help you style or change the appearance of the things on your web page. And you see, we have a lot of problems with just like, this looks really messy. Things are just kind of stuck together. We did get them to stack up vertically, but other than that, it doesn't look that great. Okay, so in CSS has two parts. There's one part of you have these rules that you're going to write in this style page, and the first part is what's called the selector, and that means what part of your web page do these rules apply to. So let's first of all write one for the whole body. And CSS looks like this. You have you write your selector first, and then you can put all the rules inside of brackets after that. So let's change our font size to be 20 pixels, and let's see how that looks. That might not look very different from what we have now. If I change it to be 120 pixels, there we go. Got some really big font here. That's too big. But we want to say it's 20 pixels. Let's do that. I'm also zoomed in a little bit on this page, so that it might look a little bit bigger than it would normally on a browser. And then let's also, one thing it's just kind of nice to sometimes just see where these elements are. Like, where is the body element exactly? You can actually, a little trick I like to use is you can put this line here that says a border. So you can draw a border around the element, and it just helps you kind of visualize where it is we're talking about. So that is what the body looks like. It is the body element takes up this much room, and it kind of like shrunk to fit the content that was in there. But it takes up the full width of the page with a little bit of margin on both sides. So that's the body element, and we can leave that red bar in there just to give us a little visual indication of where that is. So the next thing we might want to do is format these labels, because they look a little bit wonky because they're a different width than the other labels here. And so we can format those. We can format all the labels on the page so that they have the same width. So if I say width 150 pixels, say, and the thing is that is not going to work because of the type of that element isn't something that can take a width normally. But you can kind of change it the display type. So we're going to say the display type is inline block. So it means it's like a little square that is going to fit in line with other text, but it's more like a block element. And then we can set the width. And then now you see it takes up just the right amount of room that we want. And we might want to format the text to be moved to the right. So we can say text align right. So now those things are positioned kind of next to the number instead of being positioned differently. And I think I would also, you notice our button is, I think our button is not not positioned kind of right underneath that, and we can just do a little trick here where we'll add a label in front of that button, but not put anything in it, and so that will kind of make it more line up. Doesn't line up perfectly, but sometimes these things are hard to get right. So, but that looks better. And the next thing we can do is all of this stuff is kind of like squeezed together. It doesn't look that great. So let's style those div elements that we had before. And one thing we can do is just add some margin. And so it just adds a little bit of space around everything. I could add more margin, like 20 pixels, and just kind of gives a little bit of breathing room for things, and it just makes it look that much nicer. So, okay, so that's HTML and CSS. So that's like 2 out of the 3 things that a front-end developer has to learn. And obviously there's lots of different things about different ways of writing selectors, different ways of writing rules for styling things. You can change the colors of things. You can change the left and right alignment. You can build tables and grids and all kinds of fancy stuff. So, but those are some of the basic rules that you'll be using when you style something with CSS. Okay, so now comes the programming part. You know, we're going to have to add these 2 numbers up. We can type in numbers here, but this doesn't do anything, and we still have undefined for this. So let's write some JavaScript code. So JavaScript is a pretty nice programming language, and if you've never written a programming language before, there's a little bit to learn. But one idea of the idea of a programming language is you have a bunch of steps, and the computer's going to follow those steps one by one, and then you know, you're basically telling the computer what to do. You have to break down any problem into multiple steps. So what are the steps of adding these 2 numbers? The first step is to get the numbers into our program. Like we have to find what the numbers are and get them into our code, and then we add them together. And actually, in this case, these numbers are actually text. Like it's the letters 1, 2, and 3. We're going to have to convert that into an actual number. So JavaScript has different data types. So there's strings, which are like text, numbers, which could be integers or bigger numbers, you know, with decimal points and things like that. So we have to read the numbers out, convert them from text into real numbers, and then add them together, and then we're going to put them back onto the web page. So that's reading them out and then converting them and putting them back. So, and in JavaScript, you organize your code into what's called a function. So let's write a function called add to numbers, and this function is going to know about the web page that it's on. So it's going to know to go get the different values out of the web page. So one of the things we can do is, you know, how do we identify like where we're trying to get things out of this other web page? So we have to add some what are called more attributes to some of these inputs so that we can find their attributes. So let me shrink that up a little bit. So here, this input, let's say ID equals N1. So that's its identifier for that one. And then this one, let's say ID equals N2. So now we have N1 and N2 as input numbers. And let's see if we can just get those first. So in JavaScript, we create things called variables, which are things that hold values. So I'm going to have a variable called N1. And now I have to look at this HTML document and find the first input element. And in JavaScript, the way you do that is you use the document object. So document dot get element by ID, and I can say N1. Okay, so that was kind of cryptic looking, but this basically says, look at the document. It has a function associated with that document called get element by ID. So you know that we have all these elements, and then you pass an argument to that function that says what is the name that you're looking for, and then it returns that element. Once you have, yeah, let's do that. So I will, now there's a clever little thing in JavaScript called the alert function, and it's good for very basic debugging. So let's alert the variable n1. And so let's, we have to actually run this function now. So what we'll do is we'll hook it up to our button. In our button, we're going to say onClick is another attribute, and we're going to call add2numbers. We're going to call the add2numbers function. Okay, so now whenever I click this button, it should call that function. And that didn't work. What's going on? Okay, I see what happened. I said onLick. I do not recommend licking your web page. So let's change it to onClick and see if that works. There we go. And you can see here it says you get a little alert pop up. This is not a very good form for a real website, but when you're debugging, you can use this. And it says object HTML input element. Oh yeah, so that it found that input element, and that's the way it gets displayed when you say alert. Well, we don't really want the element. We want actually what's inside the element, which is that text that's in there. So I can just say text content. Oh no, I'm sorry. That's the wrong thing. Value. So for an input element, you just say dot value. And now let's type in something 1, 2, 3, and then we'll click that, and there we go. We have the string 1, 2, 3 here. So great. That gives us our first element. Let's get the second element. N2 equals document get element by ID N2. And then we want to get that value of that input element. And we can alert N1 and N2. I think that works. Let's see. No, that didn't work. Let's say alert N2. Let's make sure that's working. Well, yeah, there's N2. But let's see what happens if I add them together. N1 plus N2. If I just put a plus. So this is an expression in JavaScript that says add those two things together. And let's add 2 and 2. And you add them together, and you get 22. Okay, so the reason for that is, like I said, when you got the value out of those input elements, they're text strings. And when the plus sign can mean two things in JavaScript. It could mean if you have two text strings, it'll put them together and just side by side. So put the 2 next to the 2, and that's adding the 2 strings. That's not really what we want to do. We want to treat them as numbers and add them as numbers. So we have to change N1 and N2 to be their numeric values. So there's actually an easy way to do that. You say parse int. So we're just going to convert them to integers. We're going to assume they're integers, and then we alert N1 plus N2. Let's see what that does. So now we put 2 and 2, and we add them together, and we get 4. Great. So that is it. And now we have to put it back on the web page because we just have this little alert. The last step is we want to put it into where we had that place to put the answer. And let's take a look. We need to find this element, which is the span, and we're going to call that the answer, say. So ID is answer. So when we get that element, let's go here. Let's take this away. And we're going to say document get element by ID the answer. Okay, so now we have in our hand kind of the element itself. If we want to, and it's a text span, so it's the property we want to set there is called text content. And we'll say equals n1 plus n2. All right, so let's try that. 2 and 2, and you add them together, and you get 4 right there on your web page. So, boom, 21, great. We can change these numbers, add them again. It's always fun to get your program working and then play around with it and marvel at the thing you've created. So, well, that's it. So, just to recap, I showed you how to make some HTML. You see how to create a web page. The CSS made it look pretty, maybe not that pretty, but prettier. And there's a lot to learn there about how to get really fancy with images and all kinds of things you can do with the web. And then JavaScript shows how to add some interactivity, add some you know, computery stuff to our web page that'll actually do something for the user. So I hope you enjoyed that. It demystifies a little bit. If this is the very first time you're seeing how web pages are built, I hope that helps you out. Okay, and have a great program. Okay, bye.